Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and today we have a first timer making her official debut here on the show. My guest is a passionate storyteller who weaves intricate tales in science fiction and fantasy. Her debut novel, Aninus, is a fantastical sci-fi epic that transports readers to vividly imagined worlds filled with complex characters and compelling narratives. Drawing on her experiences, my guest explores realistic and challenging themes, crafting characters that resonate deeply with her audience. She loves serious world building and delights in creating detailed descriptions of the unique civilizations and landscapes that populate her world and stories. This meticulous attention to detail invites readers to immerse themselves fully in the narrative and prompts them to reflect on the intricacies of the human experience. When she is not penning her next adventure, she can indulge in her fascinations with veterinary medicine, spending quality time with her biggest supporter, her husband, and cuddling with her beloved fur babies. She aims to connect with readers and spark their imaginations through her writings, inviting them to join her on her literary journeys. So, with all that said, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, author Willow Grace. Willow, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Of course, I'm very excited to be here and talk about my journey.
Awesome. So before we dive into your background as a writer and your book, is there anything else you would like to share? Little tidbits about yourself to our viewers and audience.
That author bio for the most part covered it. Besides the fact that, other than spending time with my fur babies and with my husband, I do like to lead a very active lifestyle. So in my writing, I try to draw a little bit from the nature that we see here on our own planet because I do like to go on hikes and stuff. So I hope when people are reading my novel, they can see a little bit of that in the writing.
Awesome. Now, speaking of writing, your debut novel is in the works. So, as a little teaser for our viewers and listeners, what can you tell us about it?
So, my sweet little nutshell version of describing my book is that it is a fantastical science fiction epic that follows the journey of our female main character, Zaye, as she finds herself on a different planet in a different universe and goes on this journey of self discovery to figure out what role she plays in an interuniversal war between creator and creation. So it explores a lot
Ooh.
of that, those themes. It explores themes of trauma, of grief, of love, just kind of the whole array of emotions.
Nice. Honestly, that sounds like one of the books that I actually read from one of my authors, SG Blaze. Shout out to her. Her work is almost sounds like in the same realms of that. So I cannot wait to read your book when it comes out. So let's actually dive into you, Willow. So what can you tell us about, your childhood growing up? Were you always a very imaginative person? Was writing a big part of your life, or did that come about later?
Honestly, I have been writing for as long as I can remember. I was a very, very imaginative child, so I've been creating stories ever since I could first figure out how to pick up a pencil and hold it. This particular novel, I wrote the very first version that ever existed of it between the ages of 13 and 14 years old. So this novel has been about 10 to 12 years in the making. And I kind of think that at that point, the first time I finished a manuscript, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I love this. This is where I want my imagination to go. And I think too, a lot of my experiences in my childhood has led to me being able to create these characters that I hope people are able to empathize and relate to.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, what would you say was the aha moment in your life when you realized that being an author was what you wanted to be, that it wasn't so much just a hobby anymore, but this is something that you could see yourself doing, full time down the road?
I think I had two. The very first one, like I said, was probably when I very first finished a manuscript and just having that feeling of, oh my gosh, I did it. I loved that. I loved what I created and going back through and revising it. And so that was the first time that I thought maybe this is something I want to pursue. And then I think the second time that I really sat myself down and said, no, I'm going to be serious about this. This is what I want was gosh, when I went back through this manuscript to make it into what it's about to be when it's published, in my early 20s, I was like, I really love this. Like, my love for writing never went away through all the trials and tribulations of my life. I still always held on to that love for writing. So I think as an adult, when I realized that again, was when I was like, this is what I need to do. I need to pursue this and do something about this that I love so much.
Nice. So now let's actually turn to the book itself and the creation of the book. Now, as you said just now, that the initial draft of this was during your teen years and you've been developing it over the years. So, in the beginning, what were the initial goals you had with the story as opposed to now in this, next chapter of the development?
When I first wrote the book, I was writing it more for fun. It was just,
Mm,
oh, this is super fun. And as young as I was, of course, I was reading a lot of the fantasy and science fiction novels that were very popular back then. And so I had moments where I was like, oh, I love this aspect and I want to do something with this. So it was a book. It was a little all over the place and there were some things that didn't really fit, but as I matured in my writing, I started writing more so for the people like me, not only for myself, but people who I wanted to find a connection in the book itself or in the characters. So
right.
now I definitely have a much more cohesive story now that I've gone back through and fixed it up a little bit. But I think I've also changed my writing to be something that sends messages to my readers. And if they look for it, it's there. If they want just a good story, it's just a good story. But it has a deeper meaning that people who are looking for it can find.
Nice. And kind of on the lines of that, what would you say were your goals for your prospective readers when you were now in this stage of the writing process?
For the most part, I wanted to give them a realistic perspective, so to speak. Obviously, I
Hmm.
write science fiction fantasy, so I can take a lot of liberties here and there. But when it comes to relationships between characters, the intricacies of the main character herself, whose perspective we see the entire story through, and the relationships that she makes with love interests or friends or people that she doesn't know if she wants to trust. I wanted to create something realistic. I wanted
Hmm.
people to read this book, find a character, and think, wait, I can relate to that. I can empathize with what's happening to this character. Mostly because a lot of the traumas and the grief and such that's experienced through characters in the science fiction and fantasy realm, I don't feel like is delved into as much as it could be. So I'm kind of trying
Right.
to break that stigma and give them something that is more realistic that people can say, oh, I'm not alone. I know what this feels like.
Right. And that's actually very, very true. And we actually touch on that in the business portion of the interview when we talk about, how do we craft our stories to where they're familiar to the genre or the subgenre that they're in, but they have their own individuality. And speaking of individuality, I'm actually curious. So when you began writing this in your teens and then developed this over the many years to the point it is now, what was the feedback like from friends and family who read this from the beginning and now reading it now? Were the reviews the same or were they vastly different? Because now, even though it is the same story,
Mhm.
the writing, the
Yeah.
prose, and how the story is going may be slightly different.
Mhm, mhm. So the one bit of feedback that I've gotten that has been the same throughout this whole entire journey. Everyone who has read either the full manuscript or just like little bits and pieces, they keep telling me, "Oh, I want to see this as a movie." And I sure hope that happens one day, but that is wishful thinking. So I know at least that the imagery I am creating in this novel is very clear and very well described, shall we say. So I know
Right.
imagery is something I excel at. And then when I was younger, obviously there was a lot of, oh, you can tell this is written by a young person, which you absolutely could. I was a teenager. My writing had
Right.
not developed yet, hadn't learned all of the creative writing skills I know now. So compared to back then, now the feedback I receive is overwhelmingly positive. People are able to understand the themes and messages and the deeper meaning that I'm trying to get across. I think that's really important and shows how much I've grown as a writer. And I think it's so cool that it's just in this one book that I can look back at the previous copies that I made when I was younger and look at it now and see that growth. And the people who have been there since the beginning can also see that growth. I think it's going to be very, very special when this comes out.
Awesome. And you know what? I have to agree. I've actually looked at my own writings and I do cringe a little bit just because I was like, oh wow,
Yes.
that
Yes.
is kind of bad. But funny enough, I'm actually redeveloping my old stories into my new ones, which
Oh,
is
it's perfect.
completely it's so funny. Which these two stories, I'll give an example. So the first story, quote unquote, that I finished was called The Warriors of the Moon. And it was
Mhm.
set in like this fantasy sci-fi world where you had three races. You had the Aidos, who were bats, the Saurians, who were lizards, and the Aodos were the birds,
Mhm.
Saurians were the reptiles, the Smolus were the bats, and they fight in this gladiatorial arena for who controls the planet. And then
Okay.
an yeah, then an alien invader shows up and tries to conquer it, and the
Perfect.
three band together and they fight back. And
Love it.
classic, yes.
So
But
fun.
then fast forward to around 2018 and then 2021, I began writing my true novel called The Gathering, which
Yeah.
follows seven warriors from different periods in human history, taken from pinnacle battles, transported to this alien world. And in the process of developing that, I somehow shoe in the Warriors of the Moon that this is the same planet, but millions of years
Perfect.
after. So now I
Oh,
realize, well, shoot, now I got to write that book to where it actually makes sense. So
yeah.
it's so funny, but ultimately that's the joy of writing, that we can just go
Yes.
back to it and
Hmm.
redevelop our
Yeah.
stories.
Absolutely. It's been so much fun to go back through because I still have little bits and pieces of other ideas I had when I was younger that I'm now kind of playing around with and working with now that I've got something going with Animus. So I'm very, very excited to see what more I can come up with.
Awesome. And that actually kind of leads into a reflective question, one of a few that I think is important to discuss. And I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this, Will. Now, as you've said in the interview thus far, this book has been a passion project of yours for many years, developing it, refining it, and getting it to where it needs to be. And I've said this numerous times on the show, viewers and listeners, writing a book is not a get rich quick scheme.
Oh.
It's a passion project and it is work. It is an investment of time, money, and resources. And when we get to that point of publication, there is this level of anxiety, nervousness, if it's going to be accepted and well received. And
Mhm.
also, what's very important to talk about is imposter syndrome, which is in every industry, in every workforce, because
Oh,
especially for our authors, we're always hesitant of whether or not are we really being our true self, or are we
mhm.
just shoehorning a book that's
Yes.
already been out and making us reconsider if this is what we truly want to do.
Yeah.
So for you, Willow, did you ever have those thoughts of anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue writing this story developing it,
Mhm.
and really making the commitment to say, this is something that should be shared with the rest of the world?
So I think when I was younger, I did have a lot of those moments of, well, is this actually good enough for someone to want to read? And even getting older and rewriting it and recreating some things, I've had those moments where, I don't have a degree per se. I really just have a passion. I love to read and
Hmm.
I love to write. So I sat there for a second when I had finished this book and thought, did I make it sophisticated enough, so to speak, that I can have an adult audience read this and
Right.
feel like they've read something that's good? But I think that what I'm bringing to the table with this specifically in terms of the characters and the messages I'm getting across, like I said before about the grief, the trauma, just some of those things that aren't really touched on realistically in other books, I think that's enough of something that's important that people want to see. And then I also think too, I love the books I read that are in the adult genre, but every once in a while I'll sit there and I'll be reading it and I'll be like, this is really wordy. Uh, like this is a little bit too much. So I think having a nice meld between something that's sophisticated but also an easy read is what I've tried to do with this manuscript. So whenever I have that moment of, did I actually write something that was good enough, or is this sophisticated enough for people to read, or are they going to feel like they're reading like a kid's book or something? I have to sit myself down and understand what got me here, which
Hmm.
was just the passion for writing. And somebody who is truly passionate about what they do, no matter what it is, you see it in their work. So people should be able to see in my novel how much I love to write, how much I love to write these stories. And of course,
Right.
also I have my wonderful supportive husband who always tells me, "Oh no, you'll do fine. This is going to be great. You're going to do fantastic." So he's my little cheerleader whenever I'm feeling a little bit more down. So going back to my roots and then having my little cheerleader when I need it has definitely helped a lot with those moments where I'm feeling a little bit of self-doubt.
Definitely. And networking and people in our circle is another
Yeah.
question we're going to be talking about later in the interview. But now we segue into probably my new favorite section, which is the business side of being an author. Now, Will, as you said before of the interview, that your book is sent off to its editor to get the final checklist, the final edits before it goes to the next stages of publication. Now, for you, do you feel that your book will be more for the independent route, or with this editor and publisher, are you going the hybrid traditional publishing route?
So I'm going more so for the hybrid route. Um, I've got some things that I can do on my own, but for the most part, I really felt like to give this book the best shot that it needs and I think it deserves. I did want to have some of the professional help, the professional editing, the professional book cover, those sorts of things, because there's only so much that I can do on my
Right.
with my own expertise. And with how much I have put into this work, I want to give it the best shot that I can. Even in saying that, though, it's very, very difficult to get into the world of traditional publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a debut author, the hybrid route, if you're able to, can give you the best of both worlds and is the best way to try to break into the world of publishing in general. So that was how I wanted to go. Obviously, some people can go the independent route and they are fantastic, but
Mm-hmm.
I need a little bit of help because I am debut, I'm new to this. So the hybrid route has been my little bit of help. And I'm so happy I decided to do it because I have a wonderful team of people that I'm working with right now.
Awesome. And actually, since you brought that you are going the hybrid route, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this discussion I had with a guest not too long ago. He
Mhm.
is also going the hybrid route, but he also brought up a very important discussion within the book industry, which is many people tend to conflate or get hybrid publishing mixed with vanity publishing. And for people who are new to this or know what I'm talking about, as a general overview, vanity publishing is the process of if an author meets a publisher and they say, oh, we'll publish your book for this amount of money, you fork up the money, but they don't publish your work at all, and you don't get any of the royalties or revenue. I've had many friends who have been scammed by vanity publishing and have had to fight to reclaim their work. So for you, Willow, when you were doing the research into which publisher was the right one for you, did that sort of did that idea, or not idea, but did that discussion come about in your research of like, okay, how do I know this is a legitimate hybrid publisher and not one who's a vanity publisher?
That absolutely was something I had to look into. I am fortunate enough to be wildly, wildly lucky. And the publisher that I'm working with, I actually met her while I was doing her room as a veterinary technician. I was working with her cats. And that's how I ended up meeting her and I had this whole conversation about the company that she's with. But in talking to her, because she also had an experience with a vanity publisher before she started going into hybrid publishing, and in talking with her, you really have to sit down and look deep into the companies that you're going to try to work with if you think they're hybrid, because vanity publishers are really good at trying to make themselves.
Yes, they are.
Yes, and the main difference is the fact that if you're going hybrid, they actually do typically have a process to figure out if your manuscript is going to work with their vision. It's a lot easier to get picked up by a hybrid publisher than it is by a traditional, but there's still a process you have to go through. You still have to query them. You still have to submit your manuscript and see if they'll take it. With a vanity press, they're going to take it no matter what. And they're also going to ask you for astronomical amounts of money to do things that with a hybrid publisher, they'll cover a certain percentage of it. So you can have a larger amount of your royalties, maybe 100%, maybe not. It depends on their model, but they'll cover a part of it so that you're not forking out thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. When
Yes.
it's still expensive, but it's not like a house payment to go and get your
No. Yes. And also very important when it comes to the contracts. And I'll give an example. When I actually finished my book, The Gathering, and I submitted to a publisher, I won't list the publisher's name because I don't want to get into a lot of trouble. But this publisher did have a reputation of being a vanity publisher, and I did not know that at the time. And they sent me a big envelope with a contract saying, we love your book. We want you to sign with us. And I was about to make the signature when luckily someone pointed out on the contract that you may want to look at this section. And the section stated, you agree to fork over all creative rights of the gathering. I was like, nope, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. So that is a very important thing to take into consider, my viewers and listeners. If you do work with, a hybrid publisher and they give you a contract, really, really look into